Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today we are back in the book of Indian folktales, written down by Dracott. In the first story, we have a man looking for his fortune, which sounds a lot like the story in episode 257, The Idiot. But this one has a happier outcome. In the second story, we have several men with claims to the princess, but only one can win. And in the final story, we have a tale of a face swap gone wrong. Okay, let's begin. The Man Who Went to Seek His Fortune. There once was a Zamander, a person who owns land, who was very poor, and he had a brother who was very rich. But the rich brother never helped him at all, and often reproached him for his poverty. One day the poor Zamander made up his mind to go out to the wide world to seek his fortune, and not to return until he had found it. Having made up his mind, he set out on his journey, and the first thing he came across was the king's palace, which was in the hands of carpenters and masons. But no sooner had they built it up on one side than the other side fell down, so that the palace was at all times under repairs and caused the owner much expense and anxiety. As the Zamander stood watching the place, the king came out and asked him who he was and where he was going. So he told him that he was to seek his fortune. "Well, when you get to the place where you find it, will you think of me, and inquire why my palace is constantly falling down?" This the Zamander promised to do, and then continued on his journey. The next place he arrived at was a river, and a turtle was on its bank. It asked him where he was going, and he said, "To seek my fortune." "Friend, remember me when it is found, and say that the poor turtle, although it lives in water, suffers from a severe burning sensation inwardly. Please ask the reason for this." So the Zamander promised, and as a reward, the turtle bore him across the river on its back. After another long journey, when he was both hungry and footsore, the Zamander spied in the distance the most beautiful plum tree. It was the season for plums, so he made up his mind to have a good feast of the fruit, and he picked one of the largest and best, but it tasted so bitter that he quickly threw it away, and, turning to the tree in anger and disappointment, cursed it. "You are fair to look at, but otherwise good for nothing," he cried bitterly. "Alas," replied the tree, "this is what all the travelers say to me, yet I cannot discover why my fruits are so bitter. Will you, O traveler, find out for me in your travels and bring me word?" After leaving the plum tree, the Zamander went into a thick jungle, and in the midst of it found an old fakir fast asleep. He did not know that this holy man had slept for 12 years, and was just about to wake. While he stood there, the old fakir opened his eyes and saw him. "Son, you have looked after me while I was asleep. Who are you, and where are you going?" "I am going to seek my fortune, for I am a poor man." "Go no further, but return the same way you have come," said the old fakir. "Before I go, will you tell me, O holy fakir, why a certain Raja's house is always falling down, though he is constantly rebuilding it?" "The Raja has a daughter who is grown up but unmarried. When she is married, the trouble will cease." "A turtle is troubled with burning sensations inwardly, and would be glad to know the cause." "The turtle is full of wisdom, but selfishly keeps its knowledge to itself. Let it tell half it knows to another, and it will become quite well." "There is a beautiful plum tree whose fruits are bitter to taste. What is the cause of this?" "There is hidden treasure at the root of the tree, and when this is removed, the fruit will be sweet," said the old fakir. Then the Zamander thanked him, made a low salam, and returned the same way he had come. First he met the plum tree, and it at once inquired if he had found out why its fruit was bitter, and he told it the reason. "It is yours to remove that cause, my friend, so dig quickly and see what is at my roots." The Zamander did as he was bid and found a box full of treasure, pearls and gold and rubies, so he tied them in his blanket and went on his way. At the river his friend the turtle awaited him eagerly, so the Zamander explained everything, and the turtle said, "I will impart half the knowledge to you as a reward. Stoop down and listen." The man did as he was bid, and the creature imparted great wisdom to him in whispers. After this he went to meet the king, who said, "Well, traveler, what news? Have you found your fortune?" "Yes, O king, and the cause of your trouble is that, until your daughter is married, your house will continue to fall down." "Will you marry her?" the king said. The Zamander gladly consented, and the marriage took place with great pomp. After that, he returned to his own home, and there he met his older brother. "You see, brother," said the Zamander, "that you said it was my fate to have but a pound of flour every day. But I have found my good fortune at last." The end. Okay, and story number 2. 3 Wise Men and the King's Daughter. A king had a very beautiful daughter, and was anxious that she should marry someone who made himself famous in some particular way. 3 men in the city came forward and begged the king for her hand in marriage. "But what can you do?" asked the king. "I can tell if a thing is lost and where to find it," said the first, "and produce it if required." The second said, "I can make such wonderful horses out of wood that they can rise to any height and go anywhere." The third said, "I can shoot with my bow any living thing." The king was pleased and went and told his daughter, asking her to choose which she would have as her husband. "I will tell you tomorrow," said the girl. The king agreed, but on the morrow she was nowhere to be found, and her father was much distressed, and he went to the 3 wise men. "Now," he said to the first, "tell me where my daughter is." "She is with the fairies," he replied, "and unless the one in charge of her is killed, she cannot return." Then the king turned to the other 2 men. To the horsemaker he said, "Go and make me a horse," and to the other, "Take your bow and arrow, mount the horse, go and shoot the fairy, and bring my daughter back with you." Forthwith the men prepared. The horse was made and mounted by the man with his bow and arrows. Then they all disappeared into the skies. There they found the king's daughter, guarded by a fairy. The third man soon shot the fairy with his bow and arrow, and lifting the princess upon his horse, returned with her to her father. Now each man felt that he had an equal claim upon her, and had earned her as his wife. So the king asked her to decide. "I will marry the man who shot the fairy," she said, "and no other." This decision being final, they had a grand feast in celebration of her marriage. The moral of the story is, those who think they have the best claim do not always attain their desires. The end. Okay, and story number 3, Barbil's Son. A Raja's son once went to worship at a sacred stone. When there, he beheld a lovely young girl, so, falling on his face before the stone, he said, "If you will but give me this girl as my bride, I will give you my head as a sacrifice." His prayer was granted, and he married the girl. For 2 months he was so happy that he never remembered his vow. But at the end of that time, a Brahmin came and reminded him of it. So after bidding his wife a loving farewell, he went sadly away, and cutting off his head, placed it near the stone as a sacrifice. Now his father, Barbil, missing him, came there to search, and was horrified to find his son's dead body with the head offered to the stone. "What is my life worth to me now? I will also sacrifice myself," said he, and forthwith he too cut off his own head and placed it beside that of his son. The bride, finding neither father nor husband return, went forth in search of them, and seeing what had happened, determined to add her own life to the sacrifice. She was just about to destroy herself when a voice nearby said, "Daughter, do not hurt yourself. The heads alone are off, but if you take them and place them beside the bodies, they will unite again." The delighted girl immediately did as she was directed, and the two heads were united with the bodies, so that once again she saw her husband and father alive. But no sooner did they begin to speak than she found that she had made a terrible mistake, for, in her eagerness to restore the heads to their bodies again, she had not noticed that she had united her husband's head to his father's body, and Barbil's head to her husband's body. While the two men quarreled over this mistake, the poor girl, greatly distressed, appealed to the gods to help her. They asked her to cease weeping. "The head is the principal thing," they said. "Do not mind the body. If you were the daughter of a poor man and married a prince, Barbil, having taken the form of a prince, is also of royal blood, so it matters not. Let him that has the head of your husband be your husband again, and he who has the head of the king be the king." Thus they settled the matter and returned home. The moral of the story is, the head rules the body, and not the body the head. The end. Well, that first one's a fun tale, and I've heard it in many cultures by now. The second one was a bit more fun, as it was a good way to judge who was the most deserving. And finally, the third one was kind of funny, but a strange thought experiment. I think it would be very strange to see my wife with her mother's body. That's just a lot to think about. Okay, and today's podcast shout-out is to the Ye Olde Crime Podcast. Lindsay and Madison take you back in history and get the lowdown on crimes of old. There are a lot of crimes and disasters that I have not heard of, so it's always fun to learn about death from a distance. And they have the cramp word segment, where people go back and listen to Victorian slang and try and pick out what it means. I do okay, probably slightly better than average in that one. And so if you love their show as much as I do, go and give them a like, a listen, and a review, especially on Good Pods, or Podchaser, that's another good service. And the listener shout-out is to Conakry Guinea. Originally located on the island of Tombo, the city built up onto the peninsula next to the island. In 1885, there were only 500 people living in the city. The name of the country for a while was Conakry Guinea, so that it wasn't confused with Guinea-Bissau and Equatorial Guinea. The name Guinea itself comes from the Gulf of Guinea, which in turn comes from the Portuguese Guinea, a general term for black people to distinguish them from the light brown Amazigh people north of the Senegal River. It now has 2 million people, which is 1/6 of the whole population. And for my one listener in Conakry, I will attempt Susu. Here we go. Inuwali anun I ha koi fangi. Thank you, and good night.